space. You can still hear me, right, Shankar? Just
Yeah,
confirm.
yeah. Sorry about that. I forgot to record. So go ahead.
Okay, do you want me to start over, or what's the best thing? Okay,
Yeah,
let me just give the outline here, right? The goal of this presentation is going to be how we prepare an enterprise for the AI ML usage, right? So we'll go through some use cases. I try to take those two use cases, right, and I'll show you a call it more generic threat model, right, and mapping to the OWASP. Talk about few incidents, and then I'll talk about how we are preparing for defending from, or what could be a framework or a model to defend with 6 or 7 different steps, right? So again, that should help you, right, looking back within your enterprise, what is going on and how you prepare your enterprise. So let me straight away go into the use case one, right? And that's one of the most common use case which I see, right? Both within the enterprise and even at the individual level, right? So we have AI assistants, co-pilots appearing in all type of things, right? So we have Chat GPT, right? Bing, we have um, even Gemini from Google, right? Those kind of chat GPTs or chat models appearing, right, which are being used by the users knowingly or unknowingly, right? So when I say unknowingly, kind of it's as a security person, you may or may not know, but people within the enterprise are using it, right? Have been now for months or years. Similarly, there is this other kind of co-pilots are appearing, right, like the Microsoft 365 that can help you to prepare your slides, or there was a very recent one, Copilot for Finance from Microsoft, right, which can help you on the financial side of things, like your Excel spreadsheets and other things that can do, and Duty AI, right, from Google, and probably many more. But that's kind of one kind of use cases which I want to go right over. Now, if your enterprise is trying to people within your enterprise are using it, right, what kind of threats it can bring. So we will go with the use case one, right? So to me, this is a very general architecture, right? I've made it more general, right? So any enterprise user interfacing, most of these you interface with some sort of prompt or chat, right? So now take any of the OpenAI or any of the other things, there will be one or multiple large language models, right, which are being backed, right, and there could be other kind of models which are getting trained, retrained, right, at different frequencies. And then as the user is kind of talking there, right, through a prompt, right, they are going to be generating some content back and sending it back as a response, right? Now I put these use case, which are these models, Copilot AI assistants are third party, hosted in third party. What I mean by that is like it's OpenAI, right? Not hosted within your enterprise. It's being hosted outside. Now, the other thing which is important to keep in mind is as the users are interacting with it, right? Even if the we know it or not, and we'll see in some of the incident examples, they're keeping some user context data so that when you ask the same a different question, they can use your context, right, to respond back in a proper way or a better way, right? It could be okay if you're sharing, and then as you see a lot of those examples on let's say I'm prompting uh, a prompt for the Copilot for coding, right? I'm probably talking about some code, right? And if I've asked a question about Python, then it's probably going to keep a context that, okay, if I'm asking the next question, maybe the language used is still Python, right? Those kind of context. So now if we see this very general architecture, right, the key thing here is this is not, these are the enterprise users, right? And they may be dealing, when they're working on with these co-pilots and AI assistants, they are dealing it with enterprise job, right? They're dealing with the data which is kind of meant for the enterprise. So first kind of threat comes in, okay, if they are dealing with the data loss of that sensitive data. Now why this could be a threat, right? Because now based on different clauses, based on different standards, right, or policies, these co-pilots or assistants have, right, the data which is being shared can be maybe used for retraining purpose, as well as kind of data stored for the user context. That's also important because each of these users may end up creating an account, and hopefully enterprise, and we'll talk about in the controls, right, that okay, if we have to give them enterprise accounts, right, where we have more control on who is using it, which kind of assistants and co-pilots are approved for the enterprise usage, right? So there could be models right now. The other key thing is this user context data, right? And this is a very recent one, if you see, right, just from the threat perspective. There is this report, right, which just came, I think, last week, on around 250,000 OpenAI credentials, right? So now what it means, if you're wondering, right? So if generally kind of malware, right, people will get malware on their laptops or desktops, right, whatever they're using, and that's where the bad guys are going to be claiming or gleaning in the credentials stored on your laptops, right? And if it is the API keys from one of the chatbot or your own credentials being used, right? That's what we mean, right? That okay, if we have 250,000 open AI credentials being actually put on sale on dark web, right, in just 1 year. So the interesting thing here is, okay, those not those credentials, but if we go back, right, why I'm emphasizing it is data stored in the user context, right? Because now with those credentials, you can probably try to figure it out, what's the context, right, which was on which this particular user was trying to talk or do things. Now let's look at kind of our second threat here, right, which is very, I think, probably most commonly talked about, right, the prompt injections. Now, why prompt injection becomes interesting, right, is because we have the mixing of data with instructions. And many of you may recall, right, the whole SQL injection, right? SQL injection, you have SQL, your DML, DDL, right, data manipulation language. Those queries are being tweaked, right? If you send a prompt, you do not only send the actual data, but you also send instructions together, which causes some interesting things, right? Especially from security or the threat side of things, because in the same chat, you're saying, okay, can you summarize this paragraph in a different way, right, for me? And you give it the data, which is the actual data, as well as the instructions to do it, right? And those that gives a lot of opportunities for the bad guys to inject certain things, right, which is acts as instructions or could act as a data, right, and other things, right? So that becomes one of the other threat, right, on the prompt injections as we are doing it. So just to kind of, if you probably recall this famous clip, right, from the SQL injection side of things, right, where okay, this was done for the SQL injection, where um, yeah, the name of your son is drop table, and that's kind of what gets done, right, doing. And the parallel example here is, okay, if someone is using the LLMs in the back end, right, and are not careful in sanitizing their prompts, right, that's where they can actually do things, right, which are not intended, like deleting the whole database or other things, right, because of the prompt injection. So the key thing I pulled this example to make a point that it's a similar kind of, fundamentally it's a similar kind of things, right, the injection attacks, where you're able to inject it, you can confuse the back end on knowing what's the instruction versus what's the data plane things going along. Now, one of the opportunity definitely for like us, right, and I've seen in many companies, right, is first selecting, right, which of the chat GPT or Duet or some of those things, right, are enterprise approved for usage for the enterprise, as well as even there are companies who have sanitized that prompts, right? So they put another filter over the prompt, so that when a user is doing the prompt, they're checking for any intellectual property or other violations going in, right? In addition to whatever is done by the company who is giving that service. Third, we'll go with kind of the third threat, right? When we get back the responses, right? So not validated responses. What it means, right? Because now these LLMs, and the reason they are called large language models, because they're trained with such a big data set, right? It could be pretty much the whole Wikipedia, the whole web, or whatever they can get on the public domain or other documents. That's what it is trained with, right? So what it means is, if you're using that output for the enterprise use, you don't know if kind of some of the data which you receive back may have some intellectual property, copyright infringement, and other things going on, right? And you may be seeing kind of number of discussions on some of these companies, right, like Google and others, when they are building these LLMs, right, being claimed that, okay, they are violating the copyrights and they are taking some of the intellectual property in training that. But from the enterprise user perspective, you get a response back. You want to get, okay, create me this summary, which they want to use it for the enterprise or corporate usage, right? And that's always a risk, that what comes back, right? How we validate that. Introduction of bias, that's another thing, right? Especially from the privacy discrimination things, right? Because some of the LLM models can introduce the bias, right, on what they respond back. And if the user is not careful, right, that the and blindly is accepting or taking the responses, right, that's always a risk. And there's a whole kind of thing on hallucination. I wouldn't go into the technical details of that, right? But in general, uh, all these models are based on probability and statistics at the end of the day, right? So they have, the reason they can give you different or nice answers, because there's a bit of probabilistic thing, right, in their responses. They may vary. If you ask the same question, in next minute you could get a totally different answer, because there's a probability algorithms working on, right? That brings this whole hallucination thing, right? Which is sometimes they may respond back in a very weird way, right? So that's kind of always a risk when we get back, right? And risk increases when those responses are being used for the enterprise usage. So that's one general example. I took the use case which I see the most common, right, especially for us. And I just I'll go into the use case number two, right? So as I go this, I just want to kind of show you, this is one of the OWASP, right, top 10 for the LLMs. And you will see me using some of these terminologies. I may have used some of them already, right? Like the prompt injection, right? And what else, sensitive information disclosure, right? So why I'm not going to be probably trying to fit in all the 10 here, but I want to always, I like to, when we are talking about threads, right, try to map it to something, a standard framework, right, so that it's easy for everyone to understand. Now this particular thing, as I did the work, right, or for preparation for our presentation, I looked into few of these things, right, are more applicable in certain scenarios. Since I try to keep it like at a level of the enterprise and the common use cases, I used few of them, probably 6 or 7 of them I've used, right, in some of my examples. Okay, so now I'll shift to the second use case, right, which is kind of now appearing, right, and probably appearing in many of the enterprise or companies you work on or work in. But I do see a number of systems being developed within Cisco, right, for by customer support teams, right, to help out how AI can help in the customer support by replying back automatically. Things like from the sales team, right, where they can I have a model, can I have those which can give me help me predict, right, those things, demand forecasting, right, and any other recommender systems, right, so which can recommend it, open it to the customer. We see the recommender systems used everywhere, right? If we go Netflix, or okay, it's recommending some movies and other things. So a lot of those AI ML things in getting into the applications being built or supported by the enterprise. So that's the second use case I'm going to take. Now this use case, right, to again, I try to keep it very generic, right, but then it may still become a little bit complex here, right? So let me describe you this picture, right? So there is always kind of, when we hear about any AI ML system, there's a training part, there is a inferencing part where you use the actual training model. The first one which we saw, right, that was more based on copilots or these big generative LLM models being given, right, which is uh, not hosted, not probably not trained with your own data from your enterprise. But now we start going into where enterprise is dealing with their own data, right? So one of the most common way is you will train your data, right? And after training your data, you will have your, I call it private model because it's private to the enterprise, right? So it may have my own customer sales, finance, and other data that I can leverage later on, right? For within my systems or for my employees, customers, right? So that's one of the very common way. Now, especially with the LLMs, the other thing which has appeared is using these LangChains, right? So LangChain is where you can actually build a program using LangChain agents, right, where you can go through different models and can come up with a output or a response back, right? Now these publicly hosted generative LLMs, right? Those are very huge, right? If you've heard of, right, things like OpenAI or Gemini, those companies have spent millions and millions of dollars just to train those, right? So it's not even feasible for a company to just train their own very large model, right, themselves. They may be kind of doing it at a smaller scale. So you will have advantage on leveraging that, right? So if you have to build a good system, and that's where the rags, right, or the LangChain comes into play, where you can use a multiple of these. Basically, you may kind of start from one place, right, from one question you can ask, right, and then you can go into your own private model to get the second part of the response. That's why it's called chaining. You could even have some privately hosted LLMs, right? That's the other model which I have seen within my company, right? And probably is happening other places where, okay, some smaller models, you can get it from Hugging Face and you want to host it yourself rather than going to the public side of it, right? And generally, many applications are appearing, right, where you're using mixture of them, right, using these LangChains. The other thing I should talk about is the embeddings, right? So what happens when you train these large models, right? So especially the OpenAI, now it may not be trained on data which is specific to me, right? But I still want to ask a question which should include the public information as well as my company specific information, right? A combination of that makes it powerful. That's where these vector embeddings come into play, right? So you can actually create the embeddings based on your private data set, right? And then you can use the LangChain to do a combination of leveraging the vector database embeddings along with a public hosted LLM, right? So you use a combination to get that effect. So again, this is a fastly moving, fastly changing area, right? And so a lot of development is happening, more complex architectures are appearing. But I try to keep it kind of simple enough, maybe complete enough to cater for few scenarios which I am seeing, right, as well as simple enough for us to talk about. So let's quickly map our threat model to this, right? So where do we see those threats, right, in this particular thing, which we talked about three of them, right? So I wouldn't repeat it, right? So one of them is the poison training data. So what it means is some of your responses are going to be as good as your training data, right? So if your training data is poison, means okay, someone tweaked your training data, that can actually tweak your model, right, and that can drastically change what is being responded back, right? So now there's a lot of importance on, okay, how you secure your training data, how you ensure, right, that is representing what you want to really represent it. Now the uh, another threat, right, number five here, is the theft of the model itself, right? Now think of it like we as a security practitioners talk about, okay, our intellectual property, our sensitive customer data, our source code and other things. Now these private models also become part of your intellectual property, because if someone can get hold of it, right, then it's kind of, it could have things which are private to you, could be customer sales, finance, HR data embedded in those models, right? So you need to be securing your private models. That's why I kind of try to keep those private models separate from public models, right there. But that becomes a real threat, right? The next one, right, the insecure RAG implementations, right? So this is kind of where we go into because RAG, right, uses the language chain, right? So it's asking different questions, right, repetitively or one by one to different LLMs and models, right, to get a proper response. A simplistic example I can give you, right, and that's something which we have been building and using, right, for some of our work. So if let's say a security analyst, right, is using LLM system, and I'm probably giving an example of one of the AI based security system I'm working on, where we want to probably take a query about some security analysts want to query Splunk or a SIM database, right? So instead of writing a query, they ask a common question, right? Okay, I want for this user, I want the access logs for last 12 months, and I want it to be shown in a time graph, right? So that's a simple question it's asking. So a model like this can take that question, right, can use the natural language processing which is automatically built in this, right, to figure it out, right? And it may have a it may go back and say, okay, can I get a, if the backend sim in our case is Splunk, right? It can go back and say, okay, do I have a LLM which takes this, right? And I've trained it the schema or indexes of my Splunk, right? And I can ask, okay, can I get the, what is the equivalent query, Splunk query for this, right? And then it can go back, the next stage can go back and run that Splunk query. And then it gets result back, right, in a, let's say, JSON format. But that's not what the user wants. User wants it in the time graph, right? So it can go to another LLM which is specialized in creating charts or the visualization. They say, okay, this is the data, this is the dates, can you put it in this visualization format for last 12 months, right? And it responds back. That's how generally those chaining and those things go. But what happens, because so many of these automatically goes to the next stage, right? You could actually have insecure implementations on plugins, because you kind of go from here to talk to your SIM, credentials involved, you have those things happening automatically, right? So there is always a chances of doing some mistakes there, and we will see kind of how we have to have more rugged testing and other things, right, to ensure those kind of things doesn't exist in the implementations. And then obviously insecure output handling. Now you'll be talking to so many different places, right, and taking the output and using it for the next stage, which is kind of our more traditional, right, when we get those insecure outputs that could be sent. Now, one of my goal was to kind of show this two examples, right, as the two use cases, just to start getting you think, right? I try to keep it simple enough, right, so that we can talk about it, we can discuss, right, and you can see. Definitely you can look at like what are the other applications or systems within your enterprise where you are seeing these kind of threats. So I put together, right, few of the recent attacks against AI LLMs. You will start seeing, hopefully you'll start seeing some few, many of them are still papers, right? So those, to me, when it's a paper, yeah, okay, this is a theoretical attack, right? Someone was able to do in a controlled environment, right? Versus now you see job applicants are battling AI resume filters, right? So pretty much everyone of us is aware, right? So HR people have been using the AI technologies for that, right? And then hackers are able to figure it out, right? How to escape certain things by using white spaces or by using hidden characters within your resume, which a human being is not able to read, right? But when given to the back end models, they are actually tackling that and trying to bring your resume at the top. Now, and then probably we will see more and more kind of attacks or more scenarios that may start emerging, right, which are incidents related to that. Now, I put together like this 6 points, right, which is how at least I have seen within Cisco, right, what we when we try to build an enterprise program for defending against AI, ML, right, and ensuring how our company does it in a correct fashion, right, which we are doing. So I'll go through each of them, right? At the top is always the policy, right? So there's a lot of drivers from the NIST frameworks are emerging, right? And lot of the government frameworks are emerging on the responsible AI. And definitely we'll talk about, right, how you need to be preparing. What exactly is the policy? What are we expected to do, right? So that we ensure our policy standards reflect any changes. Second, I'll talk about the inventories, right? Because that becomes important because given a enterprise size, right, especially for Cisco, such a big company with 150,000 employees and so many teams, right? Who is using what, right? And knowing those, right, becomes a challenge. That's where kind of asset inventory. We talked about incorporating the AI threat models, right? Different testing tools are emerging. It's still a new area, right? Vulnerability management. So I'll probably go through each one of them one by one, right? Hopefully, the goal of this is to give you some frame of thought on okay how we are doing it. Now, the good and the bad thing is going to be this is very common to if I look back in last 20-25 years with cloud coming, with mobile coming, a lot of the patterns for me how we solve these security problems are very similar, right? So hopefully that may give you a way to think about, right, how you take it. So responsible AI policy, and this is one of the first thing which we did for our company, right, putting the responsible AI policy, especially understanding, right, what are the different frameworks, what are the expectations happening. And one of the thing is getting a senior leadership oversight on some of the decisions, right? So AI solutions that are fair, robust, explainable, transparent, right? This is what is being expected, right, from some of these NIST frameworks and some of the policies, regulations which we see are appearing. So we had to do some changes, right, especially in terms of how we prepare our incident management team. I'll talk a little bit more about that, right? Code generation guidelines, especially with the risk of having, let's say, a GitHub Copilot, which we made available to our enterprise as an enterprise license for it, right? So that we can have some control on how people are using it across, right? And they are consistent. But that also comes with some guidelines on okay, what code they come back, right? All those intellectual property violations or copyright violations on what code or from where they are getting, right? Those are all the things which we need to provide as a guidance to the engineers who may be using those code generation things, right? Data classification standards need to be up, right? One of the big struggle I see is many teams trying to build these models, right? But then they to train a good model, you need good data, right? So now the whole ownership of the data, if a team is trying to do that, okay, do they need a HR data, or okay, once they put it in the model, who has the ownership, right? And in what way, or it's a customer data or sales data, right? And where this data is going, and when the system responds back, who has the ownership, right? And what it can do or cannot do, that becomes very complex. And how we guide those teams and those discussions. Second thing is inventory, right? And this is one of the things which we're working on as the usage of the LLMs proliferate within the company and different teams. And again, it depends on this for which enterprise you're using. Maybe if it's a smaller company, that this may not be a big issue, but for something like Cisco, right, we know there's hundreds of usage. So knowing who is using what, right? Especially in terms of if you have an incident, right, for a application or for a system, we should be able to figure it out, right? What kind of LLM they're using, what's the version, who is the owner, if it is a homegrown one, what kind of data it has been trained with, right? So that we can look at the loss of that thing. Or once we start getting vulnerabilities announced in different versions of LLMs, we have to go back and figure it out, right? How we respond back, how we work with different owners of the applications, which may be using LLMs with the older version. And again, a lot of these problems are very similar problems, which we have seen over and over again over years, right? When you use different versions of operating systems or databases, right? And then you have to patch it, you have to upgrade them. It's a similar kind of thing which we need to be preparing for AI and LLM usage. Um, we talked about threat modeling, right? So especially how we train our architects, right, who are doing the assessments of different systems on threat modeling, right, taking the AI angle in their threat model. So I gave you a few examples. Maybe you can build upon those, right? And that's becomes important. Now the testing tools are again a new area. There are few appearing, right, testing tools currently. Not a lot of them are mature, right? Especially testing tools like the you see Burp GPT, right? So which is kind of enhancing the burp capability using the GPTs, versus the LLM fuzzers, which become important, right, when you do kind of test your LLMs and models against prompt injection and those kind of things. So I expect that over time and very quickly, some of these tools, testing tools, and AI systems are going to become mature, right? Definitely, we need to be thinking how we leverage it, right, for those tests. I talked about the vulnerability management, right? So again, at this point, right, as the LLM usage is going to be increasing, and you will see two models appearing here, right? So there's public LLMs like OpenAI or Gemini and others, right, where these big enterprises are charging based on the usage. They are going to be probably responsible for doing the vulnerability patching and other things themselves. Versus there's another model which is appearing, right, or both of them are may go together, where I see teams getting a from Hugging Face, right? If you go to Hugging Face, is a garden of so many models. People can download already trained model, get it, used it in their application. They have more control. But on the other hand, if the model has vulnerabilities, then they are supposed to be going back and upgrading it or fixing those vulnerabilities, right? So that's the whole thing, which on the vulnerability management, which needs to be we need to be prepared for. And as I talked about, the inventory is going to be important, right? Because we need to understand what is the inventory usage of those things, right, within your enterprise. And monitoring and incidents response, right, that's one area, right? So if you many of you may have heard of MITRE, right? MITRE attack. They have been working on this MITRE Atlas, right, which we have been leveraging, looking at kind of what's the attack chain, right, and how we do the monitoring and incidents response into these systems. The big thing, kind of where at least we are starting with, is getting logs from at the AI level, especially on the prompts, right? So that what kind of prompts are being sent and what are the responses. It definitely becomes kind of overwhelming, especially with the responses, right? So we are doing some pilots to see, okay, what can we do, what kind of detections we can do based on what prompts are going, right? It's still kind of work in progress to me. Even doing those detections inside the prompt becomes another AI problem, right? It's you cannot write a query, a static query, to look for certain things, right? You may have to end up using another AI model to look into those prompts. So there's an interesting space on how we do the monitoring, right, and then incidents response on those kind of systems. So hopefully I'm right on time there, right? So hopefully this session, right, was helpful, at least for you to start thinking, right, how we start defending the enterprises. So we talked about some of the use cases. Like I said, I took two most common and generalized those use cases, right, for how co-pilots and AI assistants are being used and any systems being built leveraging the LLM, and looked into how we can do some threat modeling around it, right? And then I went over kind of how at least we are preparing ourselves on different lines, right, for our enterprise. So I'll stop here and see if we have any questions.
I think there is one question. Uh,
Okay, if can you talk, say
yeah.
it, Shankar?
So Connie asks, when you are doing the inventory and there are changes to the training data sources, what is the best practice to track the updates?
Yeah, so that's a good question, right? So like I said, this is such a fastly changing thing, right? So realistically, we just started kind of doing the inventory, right? At this point, we are trying to put the onus back on the teams which are using these, right, to go and update that, right? Go and update or register, right, for this application. These are the different LLMs they're using, right, and keep that updated inventory. So to answer your question, that's how at least we are thinking. Now currently we are still kind of having all the team register that, right? So hopefully when the team goes back and updates their LLM model, they, as part of their process, they will go come back to the inventory and show, okay, this is the other model which we are using. So that's the plan for now, right? I'm sure, right, as we scale, as we learn more, right, we need to see how we can scale those things in future.
There's one more question. Curious on your thoughts of maturity for full homomorphic encryption for model privacy. Homomorphic, sorry.
Okay, I'm not sure I have good idea on that, right? So I'll probably don't know.
So Pankaj has a comment that maybe he's trying to answer your question or add to your
Yeah,
comment.
that's Pankaj, yeah.
So he's saying training data needs to be versioned using a tool like DVC. I think that's the answer. That's what he wants to add to the previous question's response.
Okay, good.
So
Thanks,
there's a
Pankaj.
tool called tool like DVC. He's suggesting that the training data needs to be versioned using that. Looks like Nick on trying to answer the other question. Google has an open source project working on implementing full homomorphic encryption. Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Pankaj, for providing your
So
valid responses.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Rob.
Uh, yeah, so I was looking more at, so I'm looking at this from the perspective of a software developer who's trying to build a secure AI ML application, or more really, we have working in a large company trying to provide sort of how-tos on how you would, get a bare bones one up and running versus the more complex, and addressing different use cases. And we're trying to make it so we don't, advise people to do anything that is insecure. But we have our typical web application process, which has lots of scans. We have a very mature process for making sure things are secure. Our customers will then also have their scanning process as well. So at least we have some confidence that a lot of these issues can be caught and remediated. Um, what do we do in the case of AI ML applications? Because it's a little overwhelming looking at the OWASP top 10 for LLMs and try to understand, so how am I going to make sure I cover all these scenarios?
Yeah. So let me go back. I can give you one perspective, right? So, and definitely it will vary based on the system and other things, right? So I'll pick a few things here, right? One is that especially for us, right, we are trying to actually get approval for the public hosted LLMs, right? Usage within the systems. What it means is, for example, within Cisco, we have worked with the OpenAI, right? So we were enterprise OpenAI. So teams can use it, but they cannot use something, right, which is not approved, right, or which we do. So that puts a control point on what they can use. The similar thing with the privately hosted LLMs, right? So if I don't know, within your application, right, if the team is, because you go to Hugging Face, you can get 10,000 versions of different LLMs available there, right? And then as a user, I can just download one version, right, can do a small tweak and upload it back, right, as Venice version in there. So there has to be some control on which kind of LLMs they are using, right? And what they're doing, right? And especially we have certain guidelines on, okay, what kind of data could be sent back to those LLMs, right? So uh, you see this vector database, right? And we have actually, we've been many teams within our company have been using more MongoDB vector embeddings, right, to do those things. So that's kind of one guideline, right, to ensure they use things, right, which are probably more vetted and more approved. Otherwise, I can see there is a risk of wild west, right? Teams may pick up anything and try to use it, right? So that's one. The second thing is going to be your data sets, right, where what kind of information your models are going to be uh, trained on, right? So which information, um, so the developer should be knowing, okay, this is the training set, right? This is what they are training on. Have they got an approval? Do they know that, okay, this data belongs, and how those things will be used? So those are some of the key things, right, which I can see. Now when we go into the more technical aspects, right, those were more kind of more, I'll say, policy, and okay, you should not do this. That helps us to keep kind of more controlled environment on which they're doing. There's a hosting angle also, right? Based on your enterprise, you can say, okay, you can host it in a public cloud, or you cannot host this in the public cloud, or those kind of decisions you can do based on your risk. Now, in terms of the other thing which we talked about, right, especially in the insecure RAG implementations, that's another angle which you may want to look into, right? How they're ensuring, right? Because I'm hoping they're using some sort of LangChain or RAGs, right, within their implementation, and that's the other place, right, where there could be, call it, mistakes or insecurities added, right? And my and again, I haven't looked into all those tools which are emerging, right? And probably there is, every day there is a new open source thing being added, right, on trying to do those things. So that may be a technical area, right, to look into how we check those implementations and test those things properly. So hope that gives you one perspective, right? um,
Thank you.
Okay. So in the interest of time, let's switch the topics. If there are any more questions, please reach out to me or comment on CSA Triangle Chapter LinkedIn group, or we are going to post this recording on the website tomorrow.
Thank you.
Ashish, take it over.
Yeah, thank you. Is it visible?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all for joining. Quick introduction about myself. So I work with IBM Security Compliance and Certification team, and I serve as a board member with CSA Triangle Chapter. My topic here is about artificial intelligence, AI initiatives and working groups within Cloud Security Alliance. This slide is about CSA introduction, what CSA does, what's the purpose and the intent of CSA as a whole, and some of these digital badges that CSA provides. Agenda here is to understand AI working groups that CSA took an initiative beginning this year and have introduced these working groups. So that individuals can, based on their interest, based on their skills, expertise, etc., if they have interest, they can join these groups. There are meetings that we do every week. For most of these groups, there are weekly meetings. For one or two subgroup within the group, there are alternate week meetings, and the discussion is about the existing standards, frameworks, best practices, maybe some white papers, etc. So we prepared a list of all of those, and then tried to bucket those for these working groups. So first one, for example, is control framework. So as you know, and as Vinay mentioned, right? So everything starts with a policy. So do we have a policy? And for a policy, we need some sort of maybe a regulatory requirement or a standard or maybe a framework, which could be a best practice within the industry. So that's what CSA is trying to do, create a control framework, identify those controls for related to AI. Another one is governance and compliance. So what are the compliance and governance obligations that an organization shall have related to artificial intelligence? Third one is about organizational responsibilities. So within the organization, as we know, there are multiple departments, multiple business units, individuals, and there are roles and responsibilities. And typically, we talk about RACI, which is who's responsible, who's accountable, who should be consulted, and who should be informed. So for a particular control or a requirement, someone might be responsible, someone might be accountable. So who's who in the zoo, basically. That's what we are trying to do here. And then the AI technology and risk. So technical aspect of AI and what are the risks associated with those. And let me move further. So as I explained in the control framework, we are discussing about developing the LLM risk scenarios, threat taxonomy. This is what we are doing, and we are trying to establish security control framework and guide for AI systems. In the governance and compliance, there are 3 subgroups or the task force, and these are some of the activities that are planned in this group. In responsibilities, as I mentioned, right? So who's responsible for about the data security, model security, vulnerability management? These are some of the activities that teams have planned, or the chairs and the co-chairs have planned in this working group. And lastly, the technology and risk that I mentioned earlier about threat modeling and AI-led teaming. Now, this slide is about how, if you are interested, as I mentioned earlier, based on your interest or maybe skill set, and if you would like to learn more, because wherever we go, at least beginning of this year, wherever we go, whichever conference we attend, people talk about AI, right? So, and there are discussions about, hey, AI will take away the jobs and whatnot, right? So I was in one of the CSA working group meeting yesterday, and someone rightly said that the AI won't replace humans, but humans with AI will replace humans without AI. So either we understand the AI jargon or the terminology, or maybe we are part of the journey. So that certainly helps. Now, if you are interested, this is the job aid or the guidance that I have on this slide. So go to this portal, search for artificial intelligence here, and then you'll find the community. Click on view community, and then you can see. So you see here, these are the groups: AI control framework, governance, compliance, organizational responsibilities, and technology and risk. So you can sign up, and then you'll automatically get the recurring meeting invite. There are some documents wherein we are already working on some documents wherein either you can contribute as a contributor, or maybe you can review, and then you go from there. I'll come back to this slide later, but for these, for example, so on the cloudsecurityalliance.org, if you click on research and then you click on open peer reviews, you'll see these documents. So for example, AI organizational responsibilities, this document they have open for peer review. So you can go there, you can review, you can add your comments, provide input, feedback, based on your understanding about it. Another one is AI governance and compliance in industry. So these are some of the documents wherein we all have an opportunity to contribute. This slide is about some CSA AI events that are planned in, I would say, couple of weeks to couple of months. One is about CSA AI Summit at RSEC. So RSA conference, as we know, one of the key conferences in US. It is from May 6 to 9, and there will be discussions about CSA AI. So if you're interested, then you can join. There is a webinar that CTO CSA Daniel and Jerry Hansen, CISO of Vanta, they are doing this webinar. So feel free to join this webinar as well. These were the slides that I wanted to share with you. If you guys have any question, please feel free to ask me.
When is the webinar, Ash? Is there a link?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'll figure out.
Yeah, Ashish, can you go back to the main that one? Yes. Don't you see a lot of overlap though between 1, 2, and 3 when it comes to the framework and the compliance of the framework governance? I mean, a framework usually has governance compliance built into it, and then in the organization one, you had GRC, which is the body that does those compliance and organization, governance piece. So isn't there overlap?
Yeah, if I agree. I mean, if you look at the title, so framework, covers everything, policy and GRC and compliance, etc. But I think in January or maybe Q4 of 2023, there were some recommendations about what should be the name of the group, and these are the four working groups that as a group team agreed and finalized.
Okay,
Yeah,
thanks.
so let me add to that. Yeah, Ken, you're right, but I don't think these are final. The meetings are happening with these names, right? We're all trying to figure it out. There is definitely an overlap. When I join these sessions, they do talk about similar things in the things that would probably more applicable in the other group. They're also talking about merging all these groups once they gain enough traction and enough updates, right, at some point. But these are it's not necessarily mean that okay, only controls will be discussed in control framework and only governance and compliance stuff will be or GRC stuff will be discussed in the second group there, right? So there will be an overlap, and there will be a time when all this will be merged and consolidated into something like AI safety stuff from CSA.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We have 2 more minutes. If there are no questions, right? Just in case if you are not already part of our Triangle Chapter LinkedIn group, please join for any updates on upcoming presentations, whether it is in-person meetings or virtual sessions, as well as the recordings, today's recording and the slide decks that we shared today.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Of the recording.